We are on the record at 10:32 a.m. Ms. Holmes, did you have any substantive conversations with the SEC staff during the break?
No.
If you would turn to Exhibit 221, which you have in front of you, and if you could please turn to, let me find the page for you first, since I know the base number is cut off. So if you could turn to page 116 of your copy, and that is Bates number ending 6354. Okay, and if you look, there's a number of text messages between you and Mr. Balwani on April 9th, 2015, starting at 8:22. Do you see that?
Yes.
So Mr. Balwani is writing to you, and he writes, if contract terms and we don't have 1,000 stores, what happens to 50 million remaining innovation payment? And you respond, depends on why terms. What did you understand Mr. Balwani to be asking you there?
I have no idea.
When Mr. Balwani is referring to 1,000 stores, is he talking about Walgreens here?
I don't know. I'm sitting here now. I could infer that maybe from the innovation payment comment, but I'm not sure.
And did you understand terms to mean terminated? So if contract terminates and we don't have 1,000 stores, what happens to 50 million remaining innovation payment?
I don't know. I don't remember this text. I don't know what the context was.
You don't remember these text messages at all?
I do not.
Did you have a contract with anybody other than Walgreens in April of 2015?
In the retail space or in general?
In the retail space.
In the retail space. There was a Safeway contract that was still in effect, and I don't think we'd signed contracts with any of the other retailers.
And at that time, had you built out any stores at Safeway?
Safeway had built out their complete national footprint. We had not operationalized in it.
And Walgreens would have been the only retailer that you have a contract with where they paid an innovation fee to you, correct?
Again, I don't know if he's talking about negotiating a new contract here or if he's talking about the existing contract. I'm not sure what this is or if it's with Walgreens. We were actively engaged in discussions on negotiating agreements with other retailers.
Did any of those negotiations involve the payment of an innovation fee to Theranos? CVS or others?
I don't know. I don't know.
Do you recall any that where that was discussed as part of the negotiation?
I know there was ongoing interaction and engagement with Walmart and CVS at different points in time. I don't remember whether there was payment negotiations with them.
So at 8:54, going back to Exhibit 221, you then write back to Mr. Balwani, scale now if need. And Mr. Balwani responds, so force build 1,000 stores? I don't think that's intelligent. Do you know what you were referring to here when you said scale now if need?
I don't.
You don't think you were referring to scaling now with Walgreens?
I have no idea.
And then a few more text messages down, starting at 9:14 p.m. There's a text message from you, and you say, if terms because we term, then we return. They term and we don't want to, we keep. Do you recall what this is referring to?
No.
Were you talking about the fact that if they were to terminate the agreement and Theranos didn't want to, that you would get to keep the innovation fee payment, but that if Theranos decided to terminate, that you would have to return the payment to them?
Again, I don't remember these text messages sitting here now. That could be an interpretation of it.
Sitting here today, what is your interpretation of it?
Do you mind if I take a minute just to read the whole stream to try to get context?
Of course.
Sitting here now, my interpretation is that we're discussing terms to be negotiated for a possible Walgreens amendment, just based on the context of the texts.
Okay, and how do you interpret that line? If terms, because we term, then we return, they term, and we don't want to, we keep.
I'm speculating, but my read is that it's saying that if they terminate the contract and we didn't want to terminate the contract, we keep whatever payments have been made. If we terminate it, then we'll refund payments to them.
So it seems this text message chain is suggesting that as of April of 2015, neither you nor Mr. Balwani were certain as to whether Theranos could keep the innovation fee that they received from Walgreens. Is that
My
right?
read in looking at this now is that we were talking about some terms that we would be negotiating in the contract and renegotiating the whole contract. I think, my understanding is there was many different sort of provisions and scenarios that we talked with them about in terms of how the contract would be amended.
If you can turn to a different page in 221, which is page 238. And for Mr. Neal, that is the page ending 6476. So you'll see that there are a number of text messages on this page from October 16th, 2015. Do you see that?
I do.
And they're between you and Mr. Balwani again?
Yes.
October 16, 2015, that would have been the day after the Wall Street Journal article, the first Wall Street Journal article about Theranos was published, correct?
It was about then. I don't remember the exact day.
Okay. So if you look at the third text message down at 7:26 p.m. from Mr. Balwani, he says, "Okay, WAG freaking out, lack of transparency." Do you see that?
Yes.
And do you understand that WAG is Walgreens?
Yes.
What did you understand him to be referring to here?
I don't know. I mean, I don't, I'm sorry, I don't remember my text exchanges with Sunny from years ago. I can sit here and try and reconstruct it now.
You don't remember this text exchange at all on this page?
I don't.
Do you remember discussing with Mr. Balwani the concerns Walgreens had following Mr. Careyrou's article?
I'm just thinking back. I remember that I remember that I had talked later about the fact that we were very sorry that we hadn't proactively communicated with them about the FDA engagement, but that we didn't know at the time what to say about it because we thought that we were trying to figure out what the right way to handle the agency was, and we were waiting to communicate on it back then. I know Sunny had a lot of discussions with them. I don't remember the specifics of any conversations with Sunny.
Do you remember when that conversation was?
It was later in 2015.
Okay. What about before that conversation? Were you familiar with what Walgreens' concerns following the October Wall Street Journal?
Generally, yes.
How are you made generally aware of those concerns?
I don't remember specific conversations. I'm sure Sunny would have talked to me in general about his interactions with them.
I guess between the article coming out in October 2015 and your conversation with, do you recall any communications that you had directly with anyone at Walgreens?
I don't think I would have communicated directly with anyone at Walgreens.
So,
besides.
And I think it was your prior testimony that generally Mr. Balwani would be the person responsible for the relationship at that time?
Yes.
And so is it fair to say that if someone was updating you about the Walgreens situation at that time, it was likely Mr. Balwani?
Absolutely.
Did you and Mr. Balwani discuss the fact that Walgreens was upset that they didn't know Theranos had stopped using the nanotainer prior to Mr. Carey's reporting in October 2015?
Yeah, again, I can't remember specific conversations with him about it, but I'm sure we had interactions about it.
Do you have a general sense of what Walgreens was concerned about following the publication of the article?
I think there were multiple issues. One was they were reacting to the press in general, but then the other was that we hadn't disclosed the engagement with FDA with them to them yet, before it was in the press.
Which engagement with FDA?
The inspection.
Did you tell Mr. Balwani to tell Walgreens that he should tell them the stopping of the nanotainer just happened and that it hadn't happened several months ago?
I don't think so. I mean, Walgreens was operating with us in the store, so they would have known locally that we were doing venipuncture, to the extent we were doing venipuncture, as I understand it.
But they wouldn't necessarily know why, is that correct?
They didn't know about the FDA inspection.
So I just want to point to a couple more text messages here.
Yeah.
If you go down to 7:30 p.m. on that same date, so a few lines down, Mr. Balwani writes to you, but it was a matter of communication. Do you see that?
Yes.
I had actually thought about it, but got too busy to chat with you, and then you respond, then let's show them this literally is still up in the air, so we literally just decided since the discussion is getting aired out in the press. Do you know what you were referring to there? What were you referring to when you said, let's show them that this is literally still up in the air?
Again, I can't remember the exchange, but from reading it now, I think it's the text message right above it that we hadn't finalized the plan with FDA yet and still haven't, namely that we were engaging with the team advisors we had on FDA who basically said, don't talk about this until you've successfully resolved it, in part because we thought there was a potential to not get 4083s in the engagement with FDA.
And a couple messages down at 7:32, Mr. Balwani then says, however, issue is we didn't tell them in advance about switching. And you respond, we'll have to present well that we hadn't decided to. And then he responds again, bad idea, at this point they know, so need to be transparent. Why was Mr. Balwani concerned about being transparent to Walgreens?
So I'm not sure exactly whether I'm still referring to the strategy with FDA, or what this is referring to. I think he's trying to say we need to be directly communicating with Walgreens. I'm reading it now.
Were you not being transparent with Walgreens previously?
Again, we did not tell them that the FDA had come to inspect because we thought we were to try to successfully resolve the engagement with FDA before communicating about it. But I think he and I may actually be talking about two different things. I'm talking about FDA, and he's talking about not using the nanotainer, just from reading it now.
Okay, so that's your impression of what these text messages are about now? You didn't have any understanding back in 2015
Any understanding about what?
about what these text messages were talking about?
I'm sure I did in 2015, I just can't remember it.
Okay, so you don't remember what this text message exchange was about in 2015?
I don't.
Okay, you can put that one aside. How much money has Theranos received from the Department of Defense for services that it provided?
I know there was a contract that was through the Burn Association, which was a few $100,000, and I think that any of the other sort of development work that we did, we funded ourselves.
Is it fair to say that Theranos historically, at least prior to 2013, made most of its revenues from either the DoD or pharmaceutical companies?
Again, the term revenues, I know just in terms of payments of cash that came in, there were cash payments from insurance companies also that we were contracting with, and I believe some of the Walgreens or Safeway money may have come prior to 2013 as well. I'm not sure of the dates.
Had you received payments from insurance companies prior to 2013?
I think so.
How much money had you received from insurance companies?
There were multiple insurance company contracts with Blue Cross Blue Shield plans, and I don't know the total number. I think each of them were anywhere from $5 to $25 million, and I think there was 3 or 4 of them.
When did you receive that money from the insurance companies?
I don't know by memory.
Would it have been after 2010?
I think so.
Okay, so let me just rephrase the question that I asked you then.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say that Theranos, prior to 2010, made most of its revenues from DoD or pharmaceutical companies?
Most of the payments we received, yes.
Did Theranos make more money from its work with pharmaceutical companies or from the DoD in that pre-2010 timeframe?
Pharmaceutical companies.
What was Theranos' relationship with SOCOM, or Special Operations Command?
We had invested a lot in trying to configure one of our mini lab devices.
I'm sorry, trying to configure
One of our mini lab devices to meet specifications that could allow it to be used by SOCOM, and at one point worked directly with them. I think there was a contracting mechanism through which we had more formally engaged, but I don't think we ever sought payment from them, to my knowledge, or at least we weren't paid by them. We funded the development work ourselves.
Were any of Theranos' manufactured devices ever deployed by SOCOM?
My memory is that we sent them 2 of them, but I don't think they actually used them in a deployment.
Why not?
Many reasons. At the highest level, we're only able to ultimately focus on trying to make the retail relationship successful, and we took on way too many things at the same time. And then we deprioritized some of the functionality that you would ultimately really want to have to use these devices in field.
What functionality was that?
There were further reductions on size and on weight and other parameters that we could have kept going in the investment of the technology, and we didn't do it.
So SOCOM was looking for a device that was smaller and lighter than the device that you had available for them at the time?
I don't know if that's the case. I mean, we invested in putting a lot of technology into Minilab to be able to use it in a distributed setting. We could have kept going. We stopped and sort of said, okay, we need to put all our resources onto this retail initiative. I actually think that what we've built is still very applicable to what they're looking for, given the way they're doing testing right now. We just haven't followed back up on it yet.
What about Theranos' relationship with AFRICOM? What do you know about that?
We,
And AFRICOM, you understand, is Africa Command.
I do. We had engaged with them on looking at whether our devices could be transported into Africa and could withstand the thermal profiles that you would see in those types of deployments. And my memory is also on some of the decision support that we were trying to build. And then later had discussions with people in AFRICOM around Ebola and Ebola testing in Africa.
Did AFRICOM ever deploy any of Theranos' manufactured devices?
They took one or two devices to Africa to look at essentially the thermal stability and the use for the operator in a sort of testing parts of the functionality of the system.
Were the mini labs that were given to AFRICOM ever used in a patient testing setting?
Just so I answer the question that you're asking, what do you mean by patient testing?
Were they ever used for patient testing and diagnosis?
No.
And when you say that Theranos provided two devices to AFRICOM in order to test, did you say thermal?
Can you withstand the temperatures?
Okay,
Can the device still operate and withstand the temperature?
So they were trying to evaluate whether Theranos' devices could withstand extreme temperatures like there would be in Africa.
That's my memory of it, and I also had memory that we had built a custom decision support system for them, and they wanted to try that out on the touch screen of the device. I could be wrong. I don't remember all the specifics.
What do you know about Theranos' relationship with CENTCOM?
We talked with them about what the greatest needs are for distributed testing in military medicine, and had engagement on how to apply our technology towards some of those problems, and then did some testing of the software in one of their facilities in Florida.
Who were your contacts at CENTCOM?
Originally General Mattis, and then there were multiple principals underneath him. The name I remember, but there were many people that we engaged with through CENTCOM as we were trying to figure out whether we could apply the technology there.
Was there ever a plan to deploy Theranos' manufactured devices in Afghanistan?
We were working to do that at one period of time, yes.
Did you end up deploying a device there?
No.
Why not?
Again, focus. We were trying to execute on the retail operation that was taking up more than all of our time, and we couldn't put the continued development into the systems to be able to get them to the specifications to get them into the field.
Was there also an issue that was brought to your attention with respect to the fact that Theranos had not received FDA approval for its devices yet, and that CENTCOM could not use or deploy Theranos' devices if they did not have FDA approval?
We engaged with the FDA specifically on whether to and how to deploy technology in Afghanistan. The concept, if we had gone through with it, was that those would be for research use only and an investigational program. But in general, yes, we were aware that for any military organization to adopt the technology in the way in which it was being used for clinical use, you would need FDA clearance. And that, just to complete the answer, that awareness happened over a period of time because we actually went in and talked to them about whether they could use this as a CLIA lab, like they use Quest or LabCorp, and ultimately reached that conclusion.
Was a Theranos manufactured device ever deployed in the battlefield?
No,
Was it ever deployed in a medevac helicopter?
no,
Was a Theranos manufactured device ever deployed in an Apache helicopter?
no,
Were you ever working towards any of those venues?
yes, absolutely.
Okay, and is the reason why they were never deployed because Theranos was focused on the retail opportunities at the time?
Yeah, we couldn't keep investing on multiple total different product lines.
In the end, did Theranos ever deploy any of its devices with DoD aside from the burn center?
I mean, there was the use of the technology for the thermal testing and I think decision support in Africa. I don't know, there was some engagement with Walter Reed around a diabetes program, and I don't know where that ended up. And then otherwise, it was just a lot of invention and development of technology around some of these sort of use cases that they have for how to miniaturize and distribute technology.
Who is managing the relationship with the Walter Reed Foundation?
So it was early. Maybe one of the people in the commercial team that we had at that time. I'm not sure.
You're not aware of any deployments being made of Theranos' manufactured devices with Walter Reed?
I don't think so. I can't remember how it played out.
And then just going back quickly to Special Operations Command, SOCOM, who were your contacts there?
There was a principal within SOCOM, and I can't remember his name sitting here now, but he was one of the people working in military medicine and trying to be able to get distributed technologies that can actually do testing.
Was that?
I don't know. I don't connect to that name, but it could be. I'm not sure.
Are you familiar with?
I recognize the name.
Was she acting on behalf of SOCOM during your discussions with SOCOM?
I think she was the contracting person to facilitate the development work for SOCOM.
Who was on your team leading the discussions for Theranos with SOCOM?
I don't remember. I know did some of the follow-up and coordination with, I think specifically. I don't remember who was actually interacting with the SOCOM principals.
Were you involved in interacting with them?
I was, yeah.
And what about for AFRICOM? Who was your contact at AFRICOM?
I don't remember the name. It was a woman in special operations, and then we also had contacts higher up that knew people who were part of the company.
Was this?
I think so, yeah.
And was there a caller who was also involved in those discussions?
I don't know.
Who on the Theranos side was involved in those discussions besides yourself?
I remember her coming to Theranos, and I think she met with a team of people. I don't remember who was in the meeting, and then there may have been some of our board members who were engaged with AFRICOM as well. I'm not sure specifically.
Who on your board would have been engaged with AFRICOM?
It was in an informal context. They just all knew each other. The board members who knew people at AFRICOM, and I don't know whether the specific conversations happened, were George Schultz, Gary Ruffhead, and Jim Mattis.
Did they have discussions with AFRICOM without you?
I don't know.
Would you have authorized your board to have discussions with AFRICOM without you knowing?
Wait, I don't understand that question.
Did you authorize your board to have any discussions with AFRICOM without you knowing?
I don't think there was ever an interaction with the board in which I was authorizing them to do things or not. They have a lot of relationships and would actively and openly engage with people that they knew, including ones who were engaging with Theranos. So I mean, we met many of these people through the board members, and I don't know what conversations they had or didn't have.
Handing to you what's been previously marked as Theranos Exhibit 246. Exhibit 246 purports to be a document with the title Exemplary Reports from Pharmaceutical Partners with starting dates number TS-000496. Have you seen Exhibit 246 before?
I don't recognize it in this format, but I recognize some of the reports.
I represent to you that this is the copy of the document that was included in Rupert Murdoch's investor binder on or about December 4th, 2014. Were you involved in compiling this document for inclusion in the investor binder?
I don't know.
I guess, sorry, in your answer a minute ago, you said you recognized some of the reports, right? So which ones do you recognize?
I just flipped it open and saw the GSK report, but I generally remember that we had reports like these.
I guess looking through the rest of the document, do you recognize, other than the GSK report, do you recognize any of the other reports?
I mean, at a high level, that there are Theranos Pharma sort of development or project reports, yes.
So you'll see starting on 497, there is a report concerning Pfizer. And then starting on 530, there's a report concerning, there must be a report in there. On 524, there's a report concerning GlaxoSmithKline, and then on 530, there's a report concerning Schering-Plough. Do you see that?
Yes.
What were these three reports about?
They're all different. At the highest level, they were about programs in which the TSPU or mini lab had been used for pharmaceutical companies.
Who drafted the reports?
I think, again, all different. I believe Theranos drafted the Pfizer document, GSK drafted the GSK document, and I think the last one is an actual development report done by Theranos for Schering-Plough.
What do you mean by an actual development report versus?
It's literally a document that is purely about the development or validation data, comparing the Theranos system to reference methods for Schering-Plough, as opposed to the GSK one is sort of a summary of what they thought using the system in their lab, and the Pfizer one more broadly talks about how the technology is being applied.
Were you aware in 2014 and 2015 that these reports were being included in investor materials?
I think so.
Why did you include these reports in investor materials?
In general, we were trying to communicate with investors about the broad potential of the technology, and this is an area that described what could be done with pharmaceutical companies, and we think is important to how our technology can be applied.
So in other words, the reports in a way gave credibility to the functionality and the accuracy of Theranos's manufactured devices.
I I've never thought about it like that, but, I mean, sure, to the extent you look at the actual data in the sharing plow report, it speaks to the performance of the tests directly. We also included a lot of data on our chemistries in general to show people what we thought the performance was.
Did you tell prospective investors that you were providing this to, that Theranos had drafted to the 3 reports?
I don't remember specific conversations about it, but if we talked about it specifically, we would have.
Did you ever receive approval? I mean, did you get feedback from, did you share the Pfizer report with Pfizer?
Yes.
Did you ever receive any feedback on this report from Pfizer?
I don't remember. It was a long time ago.
To your best recollection, when was this sent to Pfizer?
This is going to be wrong because I'm guessing, but 2008?
Well before the C2 round.
Yes, yes.
Did you send the assay development report to Sharing Plow?
I believe so. I don't think it would have been me personally, but yes.
Did they send you feedback?
I don't know.
Did Pfizer, GSK, and Sharing Plow, did they review these reports prior to you including it in the binder?
Well, the GSK one was written by GSK, as I understand it. I believe that both Sharing Plow and Pfizer had separately reviewed the Pfizer and Sharing Plow reports as sent to them.
Did you tell them that you were planning to include them in prospective investor materials?
Not to my knowledge. These are sort of the work product of those relationships, so we had the ability to do what we wanted with them so long as we weren't publicly disclosing it, in which case we would need their permission, as I understood it.
I'm sorry, what did you understand your limitations were with respect to disclosing your work with these companies?
Public statements.
In other words, your contracts with the pharmaceutical companies had a provision like that in them?
That's my memory of it, yeah.
Why did you label this section of the binder exemplary reports from pharmaceutical partners?
I don't know that I personally labeled it. Sitting here now, I'm assuming that whoever compiled it saw these as exemplary reports from the work we did for pharma.
Were you ever concerned that the title and the fact that these reports were included in the binder would give the impression to potential investors that these pharmaceutical companies had drafted these reports and that Theranos had not drafted them?
No.
Why not?
Because to the extent that people were interested in the reports, we were actively interested in talking to them about them and could have given any context that they needed.
You can put that aside. Was there a time in 2015 when Theranos was considering raising a C3 round of financing?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Did Theranos ever consider raising a C3 round?
What I remember, just in you asking the question, is that we had done a charter amendment to create a C3 series of stock, but I don't think we were actually going to do a financing. I think there was another reason that we were doing it to clean up things from the past. I can't remember specifically.
What do you mean by what you just said? You weren't thinking about doing an actual financing, but just to clean up things from the past?
There was a reason that our council had recommended that we create a new series of stock. I think I'm just trying to remember sitting here now, retiring a series.
I mean, if it's what the lawyer said to you, I don't think they're asking. I think they're just asking more generally what your understanding was as to why you said clean up
Yeah.
stuff. Is this there, and they're asking you what you meant by clean up?
I think it had to do generally with retiring certain shares that were outstanding at a certain price.
So maybe I'm not following you there. What do you mean by retiring certain shares that were outstanding at a certain price?
So I don't understand the details of this very well, but I think that we had a series of stock that was outstanding, and we wanted to not have that outstanding anymore. And so the solution that was recommended was to file this charter amendment or certificate of designation that would no longer have that stock outstanding.
So you weren't actually intending to go out and raise capital at that time?
Correct. That's to my knowledge.
Was there ever a time after the C2 round where Theranos considered raising more, and before 2016, where Theranos was considering raising additional capital at $20 for a preferred share?
Not that I can remember.
Do you recall working with Roger Parloff on an article that he was writing about Theranos for Fortune magazine in 2014?
I do.
What was your involvement in the Parloff article?
I met with him at Theranos.
And for what? For an interview?
Yes, David Boyes had just completed a trial on our IP defense, and I was to talk to him about our inventions. I was to talk to him about our inventions.
Did you reach out to Mr. Parloff, or did he reach out to you initially?
My understanding is David reached out to him.
David Boyes?
Yes.
What was the purpose of David Boyes reaching out to Mr. Parloff?
To talk about Theranos' intellectual property and how we were defending it and its potential.
So you said that you sat down for an interview. How many interviews did you do with Mr. Parloff?
I don't know, at least one.
Who else was present during those interviews?
I don't know.
Were they tape recorded?
I don't know. I can't remember.
Did anyone transcribe the interview?
Not that I know of.
Did you provide documents or other information in response to questions from Mr. Parloff?
I think so.
And what documents did you provide?
I don't know for sure. I remember talking to him about the invention and showing him a lot of the development reports that we were working on when he was at Theranos, but I don't know what other materials were shared with him.
Who was helping you gather those documents?
I don't know.
At some point in time, did the scope of the article change from that IP litigation to other issues of the company?
When it was published, it was a much broader piece on the company, but when I met with him, that was the focus of the meeting, and that was the reason that David was reaching out to him, because he was a legal reporter for Fortune.
I guess before the publication of the article, did you become aware that sort of the lawsuit angle wasn't going to be the focus? David's
PR person told me that it was going to be a cover story and that it was going to be a big piece on Theranos, but that was the only specific sort of interaction that would have conveyed that.
So besides sitting for an interview with Mr. Parloff and providing documents to him, did you do anything else to help Mr. Parloff understand the company and write his article?
He spent a lot of time with David and David's PR person, I don't remember specifics of other interactions with him.
And when you were just mentioning David, that's David Boyes again?
Yes.
Did you review the article before it was published?
No.
Did you review specific statements or phrases that Mr. Parloff was planning on using in the article before it was published?
No, not that I know of.
Did you discuss the article with Mr. Balwani while you were sitting for the interview and providing information to Mr. Parloff?
I don't remember specific conversations. I'm sure there would have been discussion about the fact that Roger was there and I think Sunny also talked to him.
Mr. Balwani sat for an interview with Mr. Parloff as well?
I think so.
Did he provide documents to Mr. Parloff?
I don't know.
Did Mr. Balwani review the article before it was published?
No.
Did anyone at Theranos review the article before it was published?
It's my understanding it was not given to us before it was published.
Did Mr. Boyes review it?
I don't believe anybody had access to it before it was published.
Did you review the article after it was published?
I read it, yes.
Did Mr. Balwani review the article after it was published?
I don't know.
What was your reaction after you reviewed the article?
Generally positive.
Why did you think it was positive?
I thought it did a really good job of talking about what we were trying to do.
What did it do a good job of explaining?
Our vision.
What about your vision?
How we were working to make lab testing more accessible.
Did you discuss the article and its contents with Mr. Balwani after you read it?
I don't remember doing so.
Did you believe that what was written about the company was a true and correct representation of the operations of the company?
At the time that I read it, I thought it was, I was reading it, thinking about it in the context of our invention and what we were trying to do.
So is that a yes?
I never thought about it as reflective of the operations of the company. I know that obviously much later it was looked at in the context of the operations of the company, and I have since read it in that context. But no, at that time I did not think about it in the context of describing the operations of the company.
So, just so I understand, is it your testimony that when you read at the time, you viewed it as sort of a fair reflection of Theranos' aspirations, but not its operations?
Correct. And its inventions, because that was the context in which I met Mr. Parloff.
And by inventions, you mean currently in place inventions or working on and?
Patents, what we'd created, right? The discussion when he came to Theranos was about our IP, right?
When did your review of the article change?
When did it change?
Yes.
After the Wall Street Journal.
Why did it change then?
Because we got into a very specific discussion about the operations of the clinical lab in the media with the Wall Street Journal.
Okay, and what does that have to do with the Parloff article, unfortunately?
Parloff wrote another piece following that article, and our team was engaged with him at that time again about the original piece.
What was the second piece that Mr. Parloff wrote?
It was intended to be a correction to his original article.
Why did he need to correct the original article?
Because he felt there were statements in it that were not correct.
Did you agree with that?
You know, I think we, again, completely mishandled it. Our team did not agree with it and fought it. I think that another huge mistake this company has made has been its engagement with the press, including Roger and the Wall Street Journal.
Did you forward the Fortune article to anyone after it was published?
I don't remember.
Did you forward the article to employees at Theranos?
I don't know.
Did you forward it to the board?
I don't know.
Did you forward it to investors and potential investors?
I don't remember doing that. I don't know.
I'm handing to you what's been previously marked Theranos Exhibit 247. Exhibit 247 purports to be a June 9th, 2014 email from Elizabeth Holmes to Sunny Balwani. The subject line is forward follow-ups with starting dates number THPFM 000-114-5643. Have you seen Exhibit 247 before?
I don't remember it, but I don't have reason to doubt the emails.
What is Exhibit 247?
Do you want to take a quick look?
Sure, go ahead.
it looks like a series of emails related to Roger Parloff.
Did you receive and review Exhibit 247 on or about June 9th, 2014?
I don't remember doing that, but I don't have reason to doubt the email.
So you'll see, starting on (5646), there's an email on June 8th, 2014 from Roger Parloff to you. And he's asking a number of questions. Do you see that?
Which one are you on?
This is the June 8th, 2014 email on 5645.
Yes.
So if you look under 5, it looks like he has some questions about the description of the analyzers. And he says, when describing the analyzers, I think I'll say they look like large desktop computer towers. I don't want to say they are the size of desktop computers because I remember them being a bit larger than most contemporary desktop computers I've seen. You see that?
Yes.
And then he asks whether there are dimensions for the analyzer. Do you see that?
I do.
And then if you go to the next email, you're responding to that question. This is on 5644, and about 5 paragraphs down in your email, you say, with respect to the device size below, the best comparison might be the next computer desktop called NextCube. You'll find images online. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a reason why you mentioned the next computer desktop?
In response to the size question?
Yes.
I mean, I don't remember this email exchange, but I'm assuming because the sizes are similar.
Are you familiar with the next computer desktop?
Yes.
How are you familiar with it?
As a beautifully designed piece of technology.
Have you used one before?
No.
Do you know anyone who's used one before?
I'm sure I do. I just don't know who.
So are you describing here the size of Theranos' TSPU or Minilab when you're comparing it to the next computer desktop?
I haven't read the whole email exchange, but sitting here now, I think so.
And then if you go to the preceding page on 5643, there's an email from you to Mr. Parloff on June 9th, and about 3 paragraphs down, it starts, we've been spending time on the footprint question. Do you see that?
Just read it again.
We've been spending time on the footprint question. As you know, we don't really want to get into the topic of the analytical systems very much at all. What did you mean by that?
Again, I don't remember the email exchange. Sitting here now, I think this is referring to the phase 2 in which we were going to deploy the devices in field, and we hadn't announced that yet, and so we didn't want to talk about it in the press before we actually had the FDA clearance to go do it.
So reading this email now, that's what you think this is referring to?
Yes. We didn't want to pre-announce it.
Okay, and then a couple lines below, you say, the analytical systems look like large desktop computers, or analytical systems look much smaller than in conventional laboratories, or have a smaller space requirement than conventional laboratories is fine. Did you see that?
Yes.
Did you also discuss with Mr. Parloff that Theranos had modified commercially available analyzers to conduct testing on small samples?
I don't think in those words.
Did you use other words to describe that Theranos was using commercially modified commercially available machines to conduct patient testing?
My memory is we generally talked about phase 1 with the nanotainer being about the use of chemistries in a high throughput setting, and then this device was what we were going to be deploying for sort of in-field use of tests.
Okay, So we're in that phase 1, phase 2 description, phase 1, phase 2 description that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Are you referring to the modified commercially available machines?
Phase 1 with the nanotainer and the chemistries running in a high throughput way.
Okay, and why did you think that Mr. Parloff would make a connection between nanotainers and high throughput and using commercially available machines to conduct patient testing?
We didn't use commercially available machines for that. We modified them to run our proprietary chemistries. What we attempted to communicate was that in the first phase, we would be using these chemistries that were proprietary with the nanotainer, and in the second phase, we would be distributing the device, and that was our vision for the company.
Did you ever tell Mr. Parloff that you were modifying commercially available machines to conduct patient testing?
I don't think so.
Did you ever tell Mr. Parloff that Theranos was using commercially available machines in any capacity?
I believe we did.
In what context?
Use of venous straws.
So what do you recall telling him?
I don't recall conversations about it.
I guess what leads you to the impression then that you told him about Theranos' use of commercially available machines?
Because we were very open about it at the time. We thought that it was a feature to be able to do both the finger stick testing as well as an end-to-end menu, so patients didn't have to go to multiple locations to get their full order done.
So I understand your answer. You think the discussions around having a venous draw capability is what you would have disclosed to Mr. Parloff?
Yes, at the time, we used the word venous draw to be synonymous with the use of commercial analyzers.
Did you explain that to Mr. Parloff?
I don't know.
Did you tell Mr. Parloff that most of Theranos' tests were run on commercially available analyzers?
I don't think so.
Why not?
I don't think we talked about the breakdown of what tests were run on what analyzer at all.
Were you worried that if Mr. Parloff wrote an article mentioning only Theranos' manufactured devices, that people would be given an inaccurate impression of how Theranos was conducting its patient testing, that it was using its Theranos manufactured devices to conduct that patient testing?
Not at the time, because at the time I thought it was all about the aspiration and the vision. Looking back at it now, I absolutely wish we had handled our communications differently.
So it's been an hour. If you're switching to something else, should we take a break?
Sure, we can take a short break. We're off the record at 11:30 a.m.
Hang on a second. Okay. Correction, looking at my SD card and the time we have left on it and close to the DVD, we're going to end DVD 2, Elizabeth Holmes, Volume 3, on the record at 11:32, off the record at 11:32 a.m.
We're on the record at 11:45 a.m. Ms. Holmes, did you have any substantive conversations with the SEC staff during the break?
No.
Thank you. I'm going to hand to you what's previously been marked Theranos Exhibit 248. Have you seen Exhibit 248 before? And just for the record, Exhibit 248 is a document with case number starting TS-0000613.
Not in this form, but I've seen the article.
I'll represent to you that this is the copy of the Fortune article that was included in Rupert Murdoch's binder in December 2014. Were you aware that this article was included in Mr. Murdoch's binder?
I am now. I don't know at the time if I was.
Were you aware that this article was included in binders of materials that Theranos sent to other investors?
I don't know.
Did you ever ask for this article to be included in investor binders?
Not that I can remember. I don't know.
So if you turn to the page with Bates number ending 616, you'll see there are two columns on that page. I'm looking at the second column on the right side, second paragraph down. it says Theranos runs what's called a high complexity laboratory certified by the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, and it is licensed to operate in nearly every state. It currently offers more than 200 and is ramping up to offer more than 1,000 of the most commonly ordered blood diagnostic tests, all without the need for a syringe. Is the statement that Theranos currently offers more than 200 and is ramping up to offer more than 1,000 of the most commonly ordered blood diagnostic tests, all without the need for a syringe? Was that statement correct as of July 2014?
Reading it now, I don't think it is.
Why not?
Because I've read Roger's follow-on articles and how he interpreted it in the context of the Wall Street Journal articles, and it's not correct in that context.
What are the correct numbers of tests that Theranos is offering at this time without the need for a syringe?
I don't know.
Did you have any reaction to this when you read it at the time it was published?
No.
Back then, what was your understanding of what a syringe meant?
It's the traditional way that blood is drawn. It's different from the butterfly needles that we used. It's a traditional blood draw mechanism.
So, I mean, earlier we talked about venous being kind of an internal synonymous term for commercially available machines. Venous didn't mean syringe at the time for Theranos, is that right?
No, I mean, we did all of ours through what we called this sort of micro sample method, which was these little butterfly needles.
Do you understand that now when blood testing is done, the traditional way through venipuncture, that other lab companies don't use syringes anymore, that they use a vacutainer and a tube that goes into the arm?
I don't know what other blood companies use.
You're in the blood testing business and you don't know what other lab testing companies use?
I don't. I know that people use a range of needles. We certainly didn't invent a butterfly.
So if you look down a couple more paragraphs, about 4 paragraphs down the same page, it says, the company has performed as many as 70 different tests from a single draw of 25 to 50 microliters collected in a tiny vial the size of an electric fuse. Was that statement correct or accurate in July of 2014? Could the company perform as many as 70 different tests from a single draw of 25 to 50 microliters of blood?
From a R&D or product development standpoint, I think it was.
Earlier you testified that 30 tests could be conducted from a single draw of finger prick blood and sort of the maximum number of microliters of blood that could be drawn on a finger prick. So how do you square the two numbers?
If I remember the testimony correctly, I think you were asking what an ordering pattern would be, and I was using the number 30 to be representative. I think what, just sitting here now, this was referring to is that in R&D we were developing and validating assays to run on a microliter or less of sample, and you could also multiplex those assays to be run simultaneously, which would, from a technology standpoint, allow you to do this.
Yes. Had Theranos run 70 tests from a single draw of 25 to 50 milliliters of blood by July 27, 2014?
You know, my memory is that we had, but again, in a product development or R&D context, not in the context of our clinical lab.
Had it been collected using a nanotainer?
Yes, for a product development. I mean, well, let me see. I don't know the specific experiments, so my understanding was that from a product and technology capability, we had the ability to run that many tests on a small sample. I don't know that we ever did it from a nanotainer directly. I'm not sure what was done.
Do you know if anyone who at Theranos would know?
I would assume some of our product team leads or our assay team leads.
I just want to make sure I understand your statement. Was it your understanding that the company could perform as many as 70 different tests on a single drop of blood, or that Theranos had developed 70 different tests that could be performed on a small sample of blood?
Just to answer the question you're asking, you're saying, was it my understanding in reading this article?
No, I'm just trying to understand what your answer was.
Yeah.
Are you saying that 70 tests can be performed on one sample of blood, and that Theranos had developed the capability to do so in 2014?
My understanding is that our chemistries, because of how small the volume is per test, can get down to a microliter or less per chemistry, and that therefore 70 could be performed on a small sample of blood that could come from a finger.
Okay, if you turn the page then to 618, on the right-hand side column, for the fourth full paragraph down, it starts importantly. Do you see that? It says, importantly, it's not just the blood draws that are tiny, it's also the analytical systems Theranos uses to perform the test. They take up a small fraction of the footprint required by a conventional lab today. Was this statement true in July 2014?
It's true as to the mini lab systems that we were using, or the prior version of the mini lab systems we were using.
Okay, but it wasn't true as to the commercially available machines that Theranos was using
No.
for patient testing?
Correct.
Were you concerned after reading this that people who are reading Mr. Parloff's article might think that Theranos was only using its own devices to perform patient testing?
Again, we weren't concerned after reading this, but later, in the context of looking back at it, I wish that this had been done differently.
Why weren't you concerned?
I think multiple reasons. One, we were of the mindset that we were talking about our vision and aspiration. Two, we really believed that we were farther along in executing it than we were, and really close to getting there. And three, we were reading these statements in the context of our own understanding of the technology and the conversations we'd had with Roger, and thinking about them as specific to that.
But this statement isn't aspirational, right? It's talking about the analytical systems that Theranos uses to perform the tests. So how is this statement accurate as of July 2014?
We were using earlier versions of Minilabs to perform some tests then, and it was
I'm sorry.
sorry.
Using earlier versions of Minilabs.
Of Minilabs to perform some tests then, and it was true about the Minilab technology family. At the time this came out, we were not, I think I read it once, we were not focused on every sentence in the article.
But it does seem incomplete to you because it doesn't mention the other commercially available machines that Theranos was using. Is that right?
Reading it now, I would have communicated differently with Roger to help him frame this in the context of our phase 1 and phase 2 model, and that's not clear in this article as clear as I wish it had been.
And at the time that you read it after it was published, you thought it was clear?
At the time I read it after it was published, I just remember thinking this talks about our vision well.
So if you turn to 619, just the next page, third full paragraph down, it says, Theranos, which does not buy any analyzers from third parties, is therefore in a unique position. Was this statement true as of July 2014?
No,
Why not?
we were using analyzers from third parties.
So were you worried about this statement when it was published?
No, I the first time that I paid attention to this sentence was much later, in I think this year.
And then a couple of paragraphs down from that, there's a paragraph that starts moreover. Do you see that?
Yes.
It says, moreover, Holmes stresses Theranos is currently seeking FDA clearance for every one of its tests, even though it's under no legal obligation to do so. Was this statement true as of July 2014?
My understanding of the sentence is that it's talking about the fact that LDTs do not have to be regulated by the FDA. So I believe so.
Where does it say that LDTs do not have to be regulated by the FDA?
I think it's the context of the last two paragraphs that if you make your own analyzers, then they're LDTs, and that at that point in time, there was not a legal obligation for LDTs to be submitted to the FDA.
But FDA had told you by this time that Theranos' tests on the TSPU were not LDTs and needed clearance and approval from the FDA, correct?
That was not our understanding of FDA's official position.
You testified earlier that you understood that FDA had told Theranos, and it was FDA's position, that the tests on the TSPU needed to be cleared and approved. Is that not your testimony now?
We understood that we could use them as LDTs while we worked with the agency to take them through the clearance process.
And FDA at this point had also told you that you needed clearance and approval for the nanotainer, isn't that correct?
Again, we understood that we could continue using the nanotainer while we were working toward clearance and approval. But that
Okay.
they wanted us to get it cleared.
I understand that part, but FDA had told you that you would need clearance and approval for using the nanotainer, correct? Even though Theranos was continuing to use it while it was submitting the 510Ks. FDA had already told Theranos that it would need to obtain clearance and approval, correct?
My memory is that they told us that they wanted us to file it, and we believed it was a Class 1 device, and they said that they wanted us to file it, and we said okay.
Okay, so how is that not a legal obligation to do so if FDA is telling you to file a 510K submission for the nanotainer?
I didn't read this sentence like that. I read it in the context of the definition of an LDT, and that this comment that the ACLA was adamantly opposing any effort by the FDA to start regulating LDTs, and that it was in that context.
Were you concerned that people reading that statement would have the impression that Theranos was not required to submit anything for approval and that it was doing all of the submissions that it was submitting to FDA voluntarily?
Not at that time. I think it was well known that LDTs were a gray area for enforcement discretion. 23andMe had run into issues. Everybody knew that, you know, there was active discussions on regulation of LDTs.
FDA had also told you by this time that it questioned whether Theranos' tests were LDTs, correct?
Again, my understanding was that by virtue of the fact that we understood it was okay to continue using them as an LDT, what they wanted was us taking it through the system, but that they were then operating as LDTs while we were taking them through the FDA.
When did you gain the understanding that you could continue using the nanotainer while you were putting in submissions to the FDA?
I had that understanding throughout the time that we were engaging with them while we were in the retail infrastructure until the inspection in 2015.
Do you recall that Fortune shot a video for this profile on its website?
I didn't remember that, but I wouldn't be surprised if they did.
Did you have any involvement in choosing what should go into that video or what shouldn't go into that video?
I don't know.
Did you have any involvement in the machines or the analyzers that should be included in the video?
I don't think there would have been any machines in the video. We, at this time, didn't want to pre-announce our mini lab.
If you turn to 617, there's a picture there of a gloved hand holding what looks like a small tube. Was this the nanotainer that Theranos was using at that time to collect patient testing samples?
I don't know if it was the one we were using at that time.
What is this a picture of?
it's one of the nanotuners. I can't tell from the picture if it was the one we were using in our clinical labs or not.
Did you submit that photo to Mr. Karloff for inclusion in the article?
I don't know. I think they had a photographer that took photos of what they wanted to take photos of.
Were you involved in directing what that photographer could take photos of and what he couldn't take photos of?
I don't know.
Did anyone tell you that that statements that were made in this article were inaccurate at the time that it was published?
No.
Did you end up sending?
Did anyone raise any concerns about the article at all to you?
Not that I can remember. No, until after the Wall Street Journal.
Did you end up sending this article to other investors?
I don't know.
Did you end up sending this article to Theranos' shareholders?
I don't know.
Put that aside. What's your role on Theranos' board?
I'm the chairman of the board.
Who else from company management's on the board?
No one at this time.
Was there anyone else from company management who's on the board in the 2013 to 2015 time period?
Sonny was.
Were you chairman of the board in that 2013 to 2015 time period as well?
I was.
Did
I'm
Ms.
sorry, you said 2013?
Correct.
I believe.
Did Mr. Balwani have any other role on the board? Did he have a specific role on the board?
Specific what, I'm sorry?
A specific role on the board?
I believe he was a member of the executive committee.
What did the executive committee do, or what did they discuss?
I don't know that it ever met. It was just a committee that had certain authorities if it needed to meet if a full board was not able to convene.
Who was a member of the executive committee besides Mr. Balwani?
At what point in time?
In 2013, 2015. That's the time period we're talking about here for all of the rest of the questions that I'm going to have about the board. So if you could just talk about the 2013 to 2015 timeframe. Who else was a member of the executive committee besides Mr. Balwani at that time?
I don't know. I think it may have changed. My memory is that David Boyce may have been a member for a certain period of time, and I think later Riley Bechtel and maybe Jim Mattis. We also renamed it to it was like a management and development and strategy committee or something like that. So I don't think there was a consistent structure during that period.
Did other members of the board understand that there was an executive committee and only a subset of the board was part of this executive committee?
We certainly discussed it with the board.
When did you discuss it?
I don't know specifically, but it was an open conversation point.
Was Mr. Balwani on any other committees of the board besides the executive committee?
I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know.
I'm sorry, were you a member of the executive committee? I'm not sure that
I was.
I remember you saying that. Was Mr. Balwani the secretary of the board at some point?
He acted as secretary for certain meetings.
Was there a time frame in which he was secretary?
I don't know.
Was there anyone else who was acting as secretary in that 2013 to 2015 timeframe?
I know when our general counsel started, she was, and there may have been some instances in which David Boyes was acting in that capacity. I'm not sure.
When did Theranos constitute its board? This is going way back to probably before the 2013 timeframe.
What do you mean by that?
When did Theranos first constitute its board?
My first patent was in August of 2003. I think we incorporated in June of 2004, and I asked to join the board then.
Yourself?
I think so.
And was this?
Yeah.
And what was the purpose of the board back then?
In 2004,
Yes.
to serve as the board of directors for the company.
And what did the board of directors have the authority to do on behalf of the company?
Anything that was in the bylaws and the charter at that time, I don't remember the specific delineation in the bylaws then.
Do you understand the board having a different capacity in the 2013, 2015 timeframe than it did in the prior time period?
No.
What was your understanding of the purpose of the board in the 2013 to 2015 timeframe?
That it was a board of directors.
Did you understand that the board of directors, let me start again. Did you understand that the board of directors had a fiduciary duty to shareholders of the company?
I did.
Did you communicate that to your board members?
I believe we had counsel communicate that directly.
Oh, when did that communication occur?
I remember specifically meetings in October of 2013 in which there were dedicated discussions on this. And I'm sure on an ongoing basis, as directors had questions, they were often asking about D&O insurance and coverage in the context of their fiduciary responsibilities.
Well, what do you understand fiduciary duty to mean?
Responsibility to the company and to the shareholders as a board member.
How did you end up filling the board, or the board that was in place in 2013 through 2015? How did you pick who you would approach and ask to join the board?
People we thought could help us with strategy, who were wise, who understood that we were trying to do something that no one had done before, and who understood that when you try to change a system, in this case with big incumbents in the medical space, it's going to be really hard, and you have to have a good strategy.
I wanted to just go through your relationship with each of the board members from that time frame. What was your did you have a prior relationship with George Schultz
Prior to
him joining the Theranos board?
I met him and discussed his book on healthcare and healthcare policy, and then he joined the board
How did you meet him?
through someone I knew at Stanford.
Who did you know at Stanford? Who was that? How do you know?
I think I met him through time.
What about Richard Kovacevic? Did you have a prior relationship with him before he joined the board?
I think we knew each other for 6 to 9 months or so, and had met a few times, and got to know each other before he joined the board.
How did you meet him?
Through George Schultz.
Why did you think he would be a good addition to the board?
First meeting was in the context of the fact he'd been on the board at Cargill, and we were trying to build a company to be private for the long term, and so we had discussions in that context. I think he's also a great CEO, and had amazing experience building Wells Fargo, including in the context of retail and retail footprint.
Did you have a relationship with Jim Mattis prior to his addition to the board?
Yes.
What was that relationship?
I knew him initially at CENTCOM, and then a little bit at Hoover at Stanford when he left the military.
And why did you add him to the board?
He's one of the most brilliant strategists I've ever met.
Did you have a relationship with Bill Perry prior to him joining the board?
Not directly. People had been telling me for a long time to meet him, but he joined the board shortly after I met him for the first time.
Why did you ask him to join the board?
A number of reasons. He has a pretty amazing engineering and technical background, going back to some early companies he helped build in Silicon Valley. He also is really focused on infectious disease surveillance and how you could leverage biotechnology to help actually build a surveillance infrastructure for this country, and then of course has policy experience, and I think he's a very wise person.
Did you have a prior relationship with Riley Bechtel before he joined the board?
Yes.
What was that relationship?
We'd gotten to know each other, and I started learning about building a private company more directly from him.
What about Bill Fagey? Did you have a relationship with him prior to him joining the board?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Who introduced you to him?
Sam Nunn.
Why were you introduced to Dr. Fagey by Sam Nunn?
I was trying to figure out who the best people in global health are in this context, and thinking about how the technology could be used outside of the U.S. and for people in places where there's not good health infrastructure.
Did you have a relationship with Bill Frist prior to him joining the Theranos board?
I think so.
And what was that relationship?
I think, again, we knew each other for many months. He joined meetings with us with sort of thought leaders in healthcare, and we got to know each other.
Why did you ask him to join the board?
Again, thought leader in strategy. He has a lot of healthcare policy experience. He has now gotten very engaged with a number of different healthcare companies, and in terms of trying to realize sort of the leapfrog technology, he was a great strategist for that.
Did you have a relationship with Henry Kissinger before he joined the board?
No.
Who introduced you to him?
George Schultz.
Why did you ask him to join the board?
Same thing, strategy.
And what about Sam Nunn? Did you have a prior relationship with him?
I did not.
Who introduced you to him?
Also George.
And did you ask him to join the board also for strategy purposes?
Yes. And also, Sam's been on the board of a lot of big companies like Coca-Cola and Chevron, and I thought I could learn from him.
So we talked about the executive committee. Were there any other committees of the board that were functioning as of 2013 through 2015?
I'm not sure. At a certain point in time, I know we established this sort of senior management development compensation committee. I don't know what the name of it was, and I had in my memory that ultimately replaced the executive committee, but I'm not sure.
You said a senior management compensation committee?
Yeah.
What was the purpose of that committee?
To do compensation for myself and for Sunny.
So that committee, would there be recommendations made for your compensation that would be taken up by the committee?
No, the committee would independently decide compensation for me and for Sunny.
Okay. So did you and Mr. Balwani have any input in that process?
We would talk to the board about thoughts on compensation.
Did you ever put forth a recommendation as to a specific number that you wanted your salary to be at Theranos?
No, we generally said we did not want cash compensation. We wanted only equity compensation.
Who was on the compensation committee?
So I'm not sure during that period of time. I think toward the end of that period of time, it was Riley, Mattis, and maybe David. I'm not sure.
Just the three of them?
I think so.
Other than those names that kind of gone through, are there any other individuals that you can remember being on Theranos' board in the 2013 to 2015 timeframe?
So I remember it got up to 13 people, myself and Sunny included. I didn't count as you were going through the list, but that was at its peak.
I think there was also David Boyes.
Yes.
Who understood was previously your counsel.
Correct. And still our counsel when he was on the board as well.
Why did you end up asking him to join the board?
That was at the time, I think, that we were creating the board of counselors, and we were trying to begin the process of restructuring the company, and he wanted to help us.
Why did you decide to rename the board of counselors?
We didn't. We removed certain individuals from the board.
You removed certain individuals from the board. So certain individuals were removed from the board and were put in the board of counselors?
Correct.
Who were those individuals?
I'm not going to remember them all by name. I believe that after we did this, the board became myself, Sunny, Jim Mattis, Riley, David, and then I think we removed but then added back Dick Kovacevic and Bill Fagey, I think, yeah.
How often would the board meet?
It varied over time, initially on a quarterly basis, but there was a lot of one-on-one individual interactions. And later in 2015, significantly more frequently.
What happened at those meetings? What topics did you discuss with the board?
At board meetings in general?
Yes.
I mean, it varied based on, where the company was at those different points in time. This group of people focused primarily on strategy, but we would cover topics related to what we were working to do, where we were having challenges in some cases, and also structuring ourselves as a private company.
Who decided what the board would discuss at any one meeting?
So we as management would produce an agenda. Often George Schultz would provide a lot of input on it, and it was a combination of those two things for the most part.
And how would you go about putting together the materials for a board meeting?
They were put together by a team of people, generally right before the meetings.
Who was directing that team of people?
I don't know if it was consistent across meetings. I would have input, Sunny would have input, and then sometimes the project managers who were helping us gather specific content would work with people.
Was the board allowed to take board materials with them after a meeting?
If they wanted to.
Would you send them a soft copy of the materials after a meeting?
I don't know as a matter of practice. I know we sometimes sent soft copy materials.
Did you ever send them materials for the board meeting in advance of the board meeting?
Generally, I don't think so.
Why not?
We did not have the same kind of systems and process that we have in place now, so it was very last minute.
So in other words, you didn't send them out because they weren't compiled until right before the meeting?
Correct.
Did you ever keep track of what documents board members were taking with them after a meeting?
At different points in time, I think we tried to. I don't think we did it very systematically.
Why did you do that?
Just to make sure that we had records of materials that we were sharing with the board and trying to help maintain good minutes.
I guess my question was, were you keeping track of what board members were taking from their board materials after the meeting?
I don't think in a systematic way.
But you were tracking it generally?
I mean, I can remember certain instances in which our team members would make notes of documents that were there and documents that were gone, just in the context of making sure that they'd picked up all the materials properly and nothing was left behind. But I don't think there was a systematic process for tracking that.
Why were you keeping track of what board members were taking with them after a board meeting?
Well,
Again,
I'm
I
not sure,
don't
wait,
think
wait,
we
hold on a
were.
second. I'm not sure that question is actually consistent with the answers you just gave. If you understand that, go ahead and answer.
Yeah, again, I don't think we were keeping track. I think that at the end of the meeting, assistants and other people would come in and try to make sure that all the material had been collected and that there wasn't material that was lost. And so for that purpose, they would, make sure that the material was accounted for one way or the other, because there would be long meetings with tons of binders and paper, and so they were just trying to make sure that we didn't misplace paperwork.
If materials from binders were taken out and and board members would take them with them, would you ask the board members or confirm that those materials were taken?
I don't think so.
So you mentioned that you had some one-on-one meetings with certain board members as well. Who did you have these one-on-one meetings with?
I've very frequently engaged with many members of the board on a one-on-one basis. I saw George Schultz extremely frequently, but I think in general with every member I had more frequent interactions outside of board meetings than in the board meetings itself.
Was there anyone else you had one-on-one meetings with?
I believe most of them, if not all.
What about Mr. Belwani? Were you aware of any meetings that he had with other board members, one-on-one?
I can't sit here and recall one today, but I'm sure he did.
Was Mr. Belwani, did he know any of the board members on a more social basis outside of work?
He would attend the board dinners, which are sort of social events. Got to know them in that context.
Do you know if he had any social relationships with any of the board members outside of Theranos?
I mean, I think all of our engagement with that group of people is related to Theranos.
So is your answer no?
I'm not sure I understand the question, I'm sorry.
Were you aware of whether Sunny Balwani had any social relationships with any of the other board members?
I think all of our social relationships with the board members were related to Theranos.
Okay, why don't we take a break for lunch? We're off the record at 12:23 p.m.